The Caribbean Financial Action Task Force peer review takes place in June 2020. The review is to determine whether or not Grenada is following international standards such as the Financial Action Task Force 40 recommendations. The last peer review was done in 2008-2009. Tafawa Pear, head of the Financial Intelligence Unit, explains that those standards were set up as an international gauge to determine countries' compliance in terms of the regime put in place to fight terrorist financing, money laundering, and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Failure to meet international standards, he says, can result in implications and can be viewed by the international community as having too many deficiencies. The FIU head explains what the review will entail.
Evaluation would include not just looking at the laws, viewing technical compliance, but also be interviewing stakeholders, so persons from the banking industry, persons from the car dealerships, persons from the public sector, the FIU, etc., to determine whether or not the legislation we've been talking about for so long now is actually effective on the ground. So they will actually be measuring effectiveness. Each sector must understand where they sit in terms of vulnerability, in terms of threats, and in terms of risk.
From the national risk assessment conducted, loopholes were identified. The FIU says they are now better able to put an action plan in place to address those.
Of course, the fact that we just concluded national risk assessment, the purpose really was to determine those areas that are high, medium, or low risk. We found that the major threats to be proceeds of crime from the narcotic trade, from frauds and stealing and so on. So we now identify the threats, and so we also look at these different sectors to determine where they have vulnerabilities, where there are openings, and of course there are weaknesses in policy, for example. With the various reporting entities, we've identified, for example, the used car dealerships as a group that needs to tighten its own gap. So we identify some of the weaknesses, and today what we're actually doing is looking at it and developing an action plan going forward.
Pierre says the committee will continue with similar meetings leading up to the 2020 review. He is hopeful that some positives can be generated from this.
A major issue where financial institutions are not able to verify certain utility bills and certain documentation coming from utility companies. What we're hoping that we're able to engage utility companies and enter into some memorandum of understanding, not necessarily to disclose their customer personal information, but just to authenticate a bill or a receipt. So we're hoping that we have a number of outcomes that we're hoping can come out of this exercise, but most importantly, we want this thing to be multi-agency, both private and public sector.
Chrislina John, GBN News.